the tightness of truth. The first time I felt the corset snap shut around my body, it stole the air from my lungs and something far deeper from my heart.
It wasn't supposed to happen like that.
The moment was charged with tension, the kind that lives between fear and fascination. My stepmother, Clara, stood behind me, her fingers quick and practiced as she pulled at the laces. Each tug drew a gasp from me, each breath came shallower, and the mirror in front of me began to blur with disbelief. "There," she said, voice calm but deliberate. "Now you know how discipline feels." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. There was a strange purpose in her eyes, like this was a lesson she needed to teach me. And yet, beneath the embarrassment and confusion, I couldn't deny the flicker of something I didn't have a name for. It all started 3 weeks earlier. I'd been staying with Clara since my father's job had taken him abroad. I didn't know her well. She had always been a figure of quiet elegance and impossible poise. Her presence filled the house the way perfume fills a room, gently, but unmistakably. At first, everything was ordinary. Polite conversations, separate routines, awkward dinners. Until the day she walked into the living room and caught me holding one of her corsets. It wasn't what it looked like, or maybe it was. I'd found it lying across the bed, deep maroon leather gleaming faintly in the light. My fingers had brushed over the boning, tracing the delicate stitching, the strength and fragility sewn into it. There was something mesmerizing about it, the way it represented both beauty and control. When she walked in, I froze, guilt burning through me. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through air. I stammered something, I don't even remember what. My face burned red. She stared for a long moment and then did something unexpected. She smiled, faintly. "If you're so curious," she said, "then you'll learn what it really means to wear one." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The next evening, she called me into her dressing room. The air was scented with lavender and leather. The corset hung on a hook beside the mirror, like an invitation I didn't dare accept. "Take off your shirt," she said matter-of-factly. "Clara, do as I say." Her tone left no room for argument. My hands shook as I obeyed, every nerve screaming confusion. Then she stepped behind me, wrapping the corset around my torso. The leather was cool at first, smooth against my skin. Then she began to lace it. Slowly, expertly. Each pull drew the garment tighter, reshaping my breath, my posture, my sense of self. When she was done, she turned me toward the mirror. I didn't recognize the person standing there. My chest rose and fell in small, deliberate movements. My waist had taken on a shape that wasn't mine, slender, sculpted. My shoulders seemed softer, my reflection more fragile. Clara watched my reaction in silence. "Now," she said softly, "you understand why some beauty requires control." I couldn't speak. The sensation was too much, equal parts discomfort, shame, and an inexplicable rush of something that made my heart race. "Keep it on for an hour," she said. "Then we'll see if you've learned anything." She left the room, and I was alone with the mirror. At first, I stood awkwardly, hands hovering by my sides, unsure what to do with them. But as the minutes passed, something shifted. My breathing found a rhythm. The initial sting of tightness turned into a strange awareness of my body, my shape, my reflection. I began to move, carefully, uncertainly. Every motion felt new. My back straightened. My walk softened. It wasn't about pretending.
It was about feeling.
When she returned, I was still staring at myself, lost in the strangeness of it. She said nothing, just a knowing look. Then, calmly, she began to unlace the corset. As it loosened, I felt air rush back into my lungs, and with it, confusion. But somewhere deep inside, I also felt something awaken. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom pressure of that corset, not painful, but grounding. It had held me in place, yet somehow made me feel more real.
I didn't understand it then.
But I knew one thing. Nothing would be the same after that moment. The corset had changed something in me, something I couldn't name yet, something that was waiting to be seen. A lesson that wouldn't end. The next morning, I woke up expecting everything to return to normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The air in the house seemed to hum differently, quieter, heavier somehow. When I passed the mirror on my way to the shower, I caught myself glancing at my reflection, almost instinctively. My body looked the same as it always had, yet I could feel the ghost of that corset, as though it had left invisible lines along my skin. At breakfast, Clara was already seated. She sipped her coffee slowly, her posture immaculate, her silk robe perfectly tied. For a moment, she didn't acknowledge me. Then, without looking up, she said, "How does your back feel?" I froze mid-step. My back.
Yes.
You wore a corset for the first time yesterday. Most people complain the next day. I didn't know what to say. It's fine, I managed. Her eyes lifted, studying me.
Good.
Then you're not as fragile as I thought. There was something about the way she said it that made me both nervous and strangely proud. I sat across from her, unsure of what to do with my hands. She continued reading her magazine, flipping pages leisurely, as if nothing unusual had happened between us. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how I'd looked, about how it had felt. Then she said, almost offhandedly, "You should come to the fitting room again after lunch. We're not done." My fork clinked against the plate. "What do you mean we're not done?" She folded the magazine, set it down, and looked straight at me. "You want to understand self-discipline? You'll learn it properly. It wasn't a punishment, it was a beginning." I wanted to protest. I wanted to say no, but I didn't. Something in her tone, or maybe something inside me, wouldn't let me. After lunch, I stood once again in her dressing room. The same faint scent of lavender hung in the air, but this time the room looked different. On the vanity, laid out neatly, were several items: stockings, a soft blouse, a knee-length skirt, and the same leather corset, polished to a subtle shine. She entered, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "You'll learn how to wear all of this," she said, "properly. If you're going to wear a corset, you must understand the rest that comes with it: grace, balance, and composure." "I don't understand," I muttered. "You will." She handed me the stockings first. "Go on." My hands trembled slightly as I took them. The fabric was impossibly smooth, lighter than air. I hesitated, glancing toward her for permission or guidance. She only raised an eyebrow. So I turned away slightly and began to pull them on, awkwardly, struggling not to snag the material. By the time I stood upright, my face burned with embarrassment. But Clara only nodded, her expression unreadable. Now, the corset. As before, she wrapped it around me, pulling the laces tight with that same deliberate patience. I tried to breathe, to focus, but all I could think about was the way her hands moved, firm, precise, unflinching. When she finished, she stepped back. "Look." The mirror reflected someone halfway between who I'd been and someone I didn't recognize. My waist was defined, my posture straight, my arms resting delicately by my sides. The blouse she helped me in to soften the edges, while the skirt brushed lightly against my knees. I looked different. Not a woman, not exactly, but no longer just a boy either. Something in between. Clara watched quietly. "You see," she said, "the corset isn't meant to trap you. It's meant to show you what you're capable of becoming." Her words lingered in the air, heavy and strange. I should have felt humiliated. Maybe I did. But beneath the embarrassment, there was something else blooming, a quiet curiosity that whispered, "What if she's right?" That day turned into a pattern. Every afternoon, she called me into that room. At first, it felt like a ritual of control, her commanding presence, my reluctant obedience. But gradually, it became something else. I started to anticipate it. The click of her heels down the hallway, the faint scent of her perfume, the creak of the corset laces pulling tight. Each time, I noticed new things. How my posture was improving, how my reflection began to look less strange, how I started moving more carefully without even realizing it. She corrected me when I slouched. She made me balance a book on my head while walking. She even showed me how to sit like a lady, as she called it, knees together, hands folded lightly in my lap. At night, I'd lie in bed and replay everything. I'd feel the phantom of the corset again, its pressure still hugging my ribs like a reminder of her words. Sometimes, I'd catch myself missing it, and that scared me more than anything. One evening, as she loosened the corset strings, she paused. Her fingers lingered against my back for just a moment longer than usual. "You've changed," she said softly. "Not just how you stand, but how you see yourself."
I didn't know how to respond.
My throat was dry. Then she smiled, that calm, knowing smile again. "You'll thank me one day." That night, when I looked in the mirror before bed, I didn't see resistance anymore. I saw curiosity. And beneath that, something that felt dangerously close to acceptance. When she made me speak like her, it didn't happen suddenly. It happened quietly, like water reshaping stone. At first, I thought Clara's lessons would stop at posture and dress. But she had something else in mind, something deeper. The corset was only the beginning. She was changing the way I carried myself, spoke, even breathed. One afternoon, she handed me a small notebook. Its pages were filled with elegant handwriting, flowing loops and sharp, deliberate lines. "Read this aloud," she said. I glanced down. It was a paragraph describing a woman introducing herself at a party, light, graceful, polite. But when I started reading, my voice cracked on the first few words. "Again," she said calmly. I tried again, slower, more careful. "No," she interrupted. "You're rushing. You sound nervous. You must sound in control. Speak from your chest, not your throat." Her tone was firm but never cruel. She stood behind me, listening, sometimes correcting the angle of my shoulders or the way my chin lifted. "Confidence isn't volume," she said once. "It's stillness." We practiced for nearly an hour. Every word, every inflection. When I finally read the passage without faltering, she smiled faintly.
"Better.
"You're beginning to sound like someone who knows who they are." But that was the problem, I didn't. Not anymore. In the mirror, I looked nothing like the person I had been. My hair had grown a little longer. Clara sometimes brushed it herself, saying it needed training, just like the rest of me. My movements were softer now, more deliberate. Even the way I sat had changed. It wasn't something I had to think about anymore. One evening, I caught myself correcting my own posture in front of the mirror before she even said anything. It startled me, that instinctive urge to be proper. The next day, she introduced something new.
"We're going out," she said.
"Out," I repeated, my voice catching. "Like, outside?" She nodded. "A short walk. You've learned enough to handle yourself." My heart pounded. I wasn't ready. I wasn't someone who could walk down the street like this, not with the corset hidden under a soft sweater and skirt, not with my reflection still feeling half like me and half like someone else. But I followed her anyway. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Every step I took felt like walking on stage, like the world could see straight through me. But Clara walked calmly beside me, her chin lifted, her pace steady. "Keep your shoulders back," she murmured. I obeyed. At first, it felt unbearable. Every sound, every glance from a passerby made me want to shrink into myself. But Clara's presence steadied me. She didn't hover or coddle. She simply existed with confidence so natural that it almost felt like a shield around me. When we reached the park, she gestured toward a bench. "Sit," she said softly. I did. My hands trembled slightly, so I folded them neatly in my lap. "Look around," she told me. "No one's staring. The world doesn't care as much as you think. The only person you have to convince is yourself." Her words were quiet but sharp enough to carve themselves into me. I looked around, the people walking dogs, the kids playing, the sunlight spilling through trees. No one seemed to notice me, and for a brief, fragile moment, I didn't feel trapped. I just was. That evening, when we returned home, Clara didn't tighten the corset. She let me take it off myself. The feeling of loosening it, of breathing freely again, should have been pure relief. But it wasn't. It was mixed with something unexpected, longing. I missed it. Not the pressure, not the restriction, but the clarity. When it was on, I knew exactly who I had to be. Without it, I was floating. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I could still hear her voice in my mind, instructing me to keep my chin high, to breathe slower, to move gracefully. And without meaning to, I obeyed her. Even in the dark. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation seeped into every corner of my life. I started noticing details, the way certain colors flattered me, how a gentle tone could diffuse tension, how posture changed perception. I caught myself humming while brushing my hair, using her phrases, even smiling like her, when something amused me. It was unsettling, and yet peaceful. One night, I asked her, "Why are you doing this? Why me?" She didn't answer immediately. She studied me for a long time before saying, "Because you needed someone to show you what you were capable of becoming. You just didn't know it yet." There was no smugness in her tone, only certainty. And for the first time, I didn't argue. I looked at her reflection beside mine in the mirror, the mentor and the student, or maybe the sculptor and the statue. And for a second, I couldn't tell which was which. The mirror doesn't lie anymore. It was around the third month when I realized I no longer recognized my reflection. One morning, I woke before Clara and went to the mirror out of habit. The early light painted the room in soft shades of gold, catching the faint shimmer of my hair. My hands reached for the brush on the vanity, hers, not mine, and before I could think, I began to brush my hair the way she always did. Long, even strokes, patient and rhythmic. Halfway through, I caught myself smiling. Not the nervous, half-hearted kind that used to flicker when I felt awkward, but a calm, settled smile. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't trying anymore. I was being. The corset had done more than reshape my waist. It had reshaped my mind. My posture, my voice, my thoughts, even the way I paused before speaking. I had started thinking in the same careful rhythm that Clara carried in every breath. When she finally came into the room, she stopped in the doorway and just watched me for a moment. I pretended not to notice, but I could feel her gaze tracing the quiet changes she'd brought to life. "You're brushing too gently," she finally said. "Confidence, remember? Even your hands should show it." I smiled, a little embarrassed. I thought I was. She walked closer, taking the brush from my hand, her reflection appearing beside mine in the mirror again. "There," she said softly, moving the brush firmly through my hair. "You see the difference?" I nodded. But the truth was, I wasn't paying attention to the brush. I was watching us. How our movements matched. How we both tilted our heads the same way. How we breathed in rhythm. And it scared me a little. Later that day, Clara announced that she had an errand to run downtown, and that I would come with her. "It's time you saw how you move among people," she said matter-of-factly. I froze. "Like this?" She tilted her head. "Exactly like this." My heart raced the entire drive there. I wore one of her blouses, soft cream with delicate buttons, and a skirt that felt far too light against my legs. My reflection in the car window looked composed, but inside, I was trembling. When we walked into the boutique, the air smelled of perfume and polished wood. Everything gleamed: mirrors, marble, glass. I felt exposed in ways I couldn't describe. Clara greeted the clerk by name, chatting easily, her confidence filling the room. Then she turned slightly toward me. "This is my assistant," she said. For a split second, I froze. Assistant. She'd introduced me, as if this was normal. As if this was who I was. The clerk smiled warmly. "Lovely to meet you." My throat tightened. I managed a polite, quiet "you too," but the sound that came out wasn't my old voice. It was softer, rounded, the one Clara had taught me to shape. And no one questioned it. For the rest of that afternoon, I followed her through the store, through polite conversations and delicate gestures, every movement calculated. At first, it was an act, but then halfway through, I forgot to act. I simply was. When we got home, Clara turned to me at the door. "You handled yourself perfectly," she said. I didn't answer right away. My chest was still tight from holding myself together. Finally, I whispered, "You really think so?" Her lips curved faintly. I don't think. I know. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. But this time I didn't flinch. The person looking back at me had poise. Calmness.
Grace.
The corset hung on the chair behind me, and used for the evening, yet I still felt its invisible pull on my posture. I wasn't sure if that should frighten me. Somewhere between those lessons, between the tightening laces and her steady instructions, I'd crossed an invisible line. This wasn't just transformation anymore. It was identity. I whispered quietly to my reflection, almost testing the sound. Who are you now? And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. Becoming her without permission. It started the day Clara didn't call me into the dressing room. For weeks, I had followed a rhythm as precise as the laces of that corset. Morning tea, quiet reading, lessons in posture, speech, and grace. Every day had been framed by her presence, her watchful eyes, her voice reminding me to lift my chin, to slow my breath, to be deliberate. But that morning, silence filled the house. No instructions, no summons. Just stillness. At first, I thought she might be testing me. So I waited. Then I waited a little longer. When an hour passed, I went to the hallway outside her room and knocked gently. No response. Something felt strange, almost hollow. I went back to my own room and sat at the vanity. The mirror greeted me like an old friend. Without thinking, I began brushing my hair, the same way she'd taught me. I smoothed my blouse, adjusted my posture. The motions came effortlessly now. When I looked at myself, calm, composed, centered, I realized I didn't need her voice in my ear to remember the lessons. They lived inside me now, woven into my movements like threads. And that realization made my chest ache. Around noon, Clara finally appeared. She was dressed casually, her hair tied back, her tone softer than usual. I'm going to be gone for a few days, she said. Business trip. Something inside me tightened.
Oh.
I see. She studied me quietly, as if searching for a reaction. You'll be fine on your own. You know what to do. And with that, she left. For the first time in months, the house was mine, but instead of freedom, all I felt was weight. I walked through every room slowly, my footsteps echoing differently. It was as though the silence itself was watching me. That evening, I opened the wardrobe. Inside hung the clothes she had chosen for me. Soft pastels, graceful fabrics, pieces that once felt foreign but now whispered comfort. My hand reached out, hesitated, then chose the blouse I liked best. Not because she'd told me to, because I wanted to. The realization was dizzying. I dressed carefully, tied my hair, even fastened the corset myself. The motions familiar, almost sacred. Each pull of the lace was a memory, her lessons, her voice, my resistance, my surrender. When I faced the mirror, I didn't see an imitation anymore. I saw someone who had learned her own language through someone else's lessons. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made tea the way Clara liked it, strong, steady, and sat by the window, watching sunlight creep across the floorboards. For the first time, I felt peaceful. Not obedient. Not forced. Just peaceful.
But that peace didn't last.
On the third day, Clara called. Her voice through the phone was calm, but I could sense something underneath it. Curiosity. Maybe even pride. How are you managing? She asked. I'm fine, I said. Better than I thought. There was a pause, then a faint chuckle. I thought so. You've learned more than you realize. I hesitated, then asked, was this all part of your plan? Plan, she echoed. You changed me. You must have known what you were doing. Another pause, longer this time. Change doesn't happen because someone commands it, she said quietly. It happens because something inside you was already waiting. I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt tight. After she hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Her words echoed like a quiet bell inside my head, because something inside you was already waiting. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again, just like I had on the first day. But this time, I didn't see a boy trapped in someone else's idea of beauty. I saw me, shaped by discomfort, molded by challenge, but real all the same. The corset was no longer a symbol of control. It was a reminder of growth, of the strength it took to become someone new, even if that journey began under someone else's hand. And as strange as it sounded, I whispered a quiet thank you. Not to Clara, not to fate, but to the version of myself that hadn't given up. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged inside my own reflection. When the teacher saw who I became, the sound of her car in the driveway sent a ripple through me. Not fear this time, but something else. Anticipation, maybe. I had spent 3 quiet days alone in that house, growing used to my own reflection, my own rhythm. The lessons had settled into my bones, and I moved with a confidence that felt both foreign and familiar. When Clara stepped through the door, she carried the same poised air she always did, her heels clicking softly against the floorboards. But something shifted when her eyes met mine. She paused. Her gaze flicked over me. The soft skirt, the brushed hair, the faint sheen of lip balm I'd chosen to wear without her instruction. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "You dressed yourself today." I nodded slowly. Yes. She smiled faintly, but there was something behind it, surprise, maybe even respect. "You've learned well." "I didn't just learn," I said quietly. "I changed." She tilted her head slightly, studying me as though I were a painting she'd forgotten she'd created. "Did you?" "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror across the hall. "And I don't think I need you to tell me how anymore." For a long time she said nothing. The silence stretched between us, charged but calm. Then, finally, she exhaled, not disappointed, not angry, just thoughtful. "Good," she said softly. "That's the point." I blinked. "The point?" She stepped closer, her reflection joining mine in the glass. "Do you really think I wanted a mirror image of myself? I wanted to see you find control, not under my voice, but under your own." Her words hit me like the tightening of a corset, sudden, breath-stealing, but grounding. I turned to face her fully. So this was all a test. She smiled. Not the cold, knowing smile she used to wear, but something gentler. "A journey. One you resisted, one you hated, but one you finished."
I didn't know what to say.
My chest felt full, like I was holding too many emotions at once. Confusion, gratitude, even a strange sense of loss. Over the next few days, she acted different. Less like a teacher, more like an observer. She didn't correct my posture anymore, or adjust the way I spoke. She simply watched. Sometimes, I caught her smiling faintly as I moved through the house, balancing a tray, standing by the window, brushing my hair. One evening, as the sun faded behind the curtains, she brought 2 cups of tea to the table. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said. I laughed softly. "You mean when you were being taught to?" She nodded.
Yes.
"By someone who believed I needed discipline more than freedom. They weren't wrong, but they weren't right either. The real lesson was learning where the boundary between the two ended. And I've reached that?" She tilted her head. "Maybe not reached it, but you're standing right at the edge." I looked down at the teacup, then at my reflection in the glass surface. My face looked calm, even serene, but underneath, a question had started to stir. If this was who I was now, what came next? Clara must have sensed it. "You'll have to step outside of this house eventually," she said. "The world won't always understand what it sees. But you don't need its permission to exist." That night, those words echoed in my head long after she'd gone to bed. You don't need its permission to exist. When I looked at the corset hanging on the back of a chair, I realized it no longer felt like a command. It was a symbol, not of confinement, but of transformation. So I stood, took it in my hands, and for the first time since this began, I didn't lace it up. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer. My breath came easily, freely, and I smiled. The next morning, when Clara saw me without it, she didn't scold or question me. She just said, "You look comfortable." "I am," I replied. "Then you've finally learned everything you were meant to." And though I didn't fully understand what she meant at that moment, I could feel the truth of it settle quietly inside me. The teacher had stopped teaching, because the student had started living, stepping into the world alone. The morning air felt impossibly heavy, yet exhilarating at the same time. For weeks, maybe months, I had been preparing, silently, methodically, under Clara's watchful eyes. Every movement, every word, every gesture had been corrected, adjusted, refined. But today was different. Today, I would walk outside the house as myself for the first time, without instruction, without oversight, without anyone telling me how to hold my spine, lift my chin, or move my hands. I dressed carefully, a quiet ritual I had grown accustomed to. The blouse I chose was soft pink, the skirt falling just above my knees. My hair cascaded naturally over my shoulders, no longer brushed by someone else's hands but mine. My shoes were modest, comfortable, chosen for balance, not appearance. And I didn't wear the corset. I paused in front of the mirror, holding my breath. The reflection staring back at me was both familiar and unfamiliar. She was poised, yes, but there was no guidance holding her upright. She was herself, fragile in some ways, strong in others, entirely real. When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face, warm and illuminating. For a brief moment, I froze. The world was wide and unfamiliar. Cars rumbled past, neighbors waved, and birds trilled from the trees. Each sound, each movement, felt like a test. I took a deep breath and began walking. My steps were measured at first, hesitant. But with each stride, I felt the rhythm that Clara had instilled in me, the awareness of balance, the gentle lifting of shoulders, the natural swing of arms. Not a performance anymore, but a natural extension of who I had become. A few people passed by, glancing at me casually. Some smiled, some said hello. None of them knew the battles that had sculpted the person they were seeing. None of them knew the hours spent in front of mirrors, the lessons in speech, the painstaking hours of posture correction. None of them knew the weight of the corset, now gone, yet still lingering in memory. I walked to the corner cafe, the same one Clara and I had visited weeks ago, and ordered a tea. The cashier greeted me warmly. I smiled, responding naturally. No instruction was needed, just the woman I had grown into. Sitting by the window, I watched the world move around me. I could feel myself breathe more deeply, every nerve relaxing in ways I hadn't realized possible. And yet, beneath the calm, there was a flicker of fear. What if the world didn't accept me? What if this piece I'd built inside crumbled the moment someone judged me? I closed my eyes for a second, remembering Clara's words, "The world won't always understand what it sees. But you don't need its permission to exist." That thought steadied me. I opened my eyes and noticed a reflection in the cafe window, myself, but confident now. No hesitation, no fear, just presence. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had accomplished. This wasn't just about clothes, posture, or speech. This was me, standing, breathing, existing fully in my skin. As I sipped my tea, a man walked past the window with a small child on his shoulders. The child waved at me, and I waved back, laughing softly at her enthusiasm. The moment was simple, ordinary even, but it carried a strange kind of magic. I realized that the world didn't need to know my story. I didn't need to explain myself. My existence was proof enough of the journey I had undertaken. Returning home, I felt lighter, as though each step outside had peeled away invisible layers of doubt. Clara was waiting, seated in the living room with her book. She looked up and smiled faintly. "How is it?" she asked quietly. I sat down opposite her, feeling both empowered and vulnerable. "It was freeing," I said. "Scary but freeing. I didn't need anyone to tell me how to be me." Her smile widened just slightly, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "That's all I hoped for. You've finally become the person I saw waiting inside you." And for the first time, I didn't feel the corset's pressure, the lesson's weight, or the watchful gaze of a teacher. I felt entirely myself, strong, flawed, graceful, and free. That night, I stood in front of the mirror as always, but this time with no fear, no instruction, and no hesitation. I traced the lines of my body, the curves I had grown into, the posture I had claimed for myself. And I whispered quietly, almost reverently, "I am me. I am here. And no one can take that away." For the first time, I truly believed it. The world sees me now. The first few days outside the house felt like walking through a dream, one where every shadow, every glance, could unravel the fragile confidence I had built. But slowly, the rhythm of the streets began to merge with the rhythm inside me. I walked with a steadiness that surprised even myself, my steps echoing softly against the pavement, measured and deliberate. It wasn't easy. Some days, a passing comment, a stray laugh, or even a stare would send my chest tightening, a ghost of fear curling around my ribs. I would feel the old panic rising, the urge to shrink, to hide in the safety of my room, or worse, to forget the lessons I had learned. But every time that panic rose, I remembered Clara's words, repeating them in my mind like a mantra. You don't need its permission to exist. One afternoon, I found myself walking through a small park, the kind where sunlight falls in golden patches and children's laughter drifts through the air. A group of teenagers passed by, chatting loudly, and I caught their eyes for a brief moment. My stomach twisted. I could feel the old insecurities reaching up, telling me I didn't belong. And then I remembered the mirror. The countless hours I had spent staring at my reflection, correcting my posture, adjusting my movements, shaping my voice, claiming the person I was meant to be. All of it wasn't for them. It was for me. So I held my head high, shoulders back, chin lifted, and I walked past them without faltering. One of the boys glanced again, then muttered something to his friends. I didn't hear it. I didn't need to. My confidence was no longer fragile, no longer dependent on someone else's approval. I felt something new blooming inside me, a quiet pride, a sense of self that had taken months to cultivate, and yet now felt as natural as breathing. The next day, I ventured further into town, into streets filled with strangers whose eyes could either judge or ignore me. A small cafe caught my attention, the kind with a bright sign and inviting window displays. I hesitated at the door for a second, then walked in, chest rising, steps confident. The barista greeted me warmly, and I returned the smile, effortlessly this time. I ordered a simple tea, but even that small act felt monumental. I was performing no one's expectations. I was simply living, existing, and being seen, and I was finally ready for it. Sitting by the window, I watched people pass by, some pausing to glance at me. I noticed their expressions, but I no longer questioned myself. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of freedom. The girl in the reflection of the window wasn't someone pretending anymore. She was real, solid, undeniably herself. But it wasn't just external validation that mattered. The transformation had changed me internally as well. I had begun noticing subtleties. The tilt of my head when I listened, the gentle rhythm of my hands, the softness in my gestures. Every movement carried intention now, and it felt powerful. That evening, I returned home, walking slowly up the steps, savoring the independence of my own stride. Clara was in the kitchen preparing tea. She glanced up and smiled faintly. "How was your day?" she asked casually, though her eyes were sharp, measuring, curious. I took a deep breath and smiled back. It was liberating. I felt like I could be me. Her expression softened, a rare warmth flickering across her face.
Good.
That's all I ever wanted for you. Not just to follow instructions or wear a corset, but to understand who you are and then claim it. I set my bag down and walked toward the mirror in the living room. I traced the lines of my reflection, the curves I had come to know intimately. My posture, my movements, my very presence, all claimed, all mine. Clara stepped behind me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than I imagined. You've grown beyond the lessons." And that's the hardest part of any transformation, not learning, but owning what you've learned. I turned to her, meeting her gaze. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes beyond pride, maybe awe, maybe respect, maybe a quiet relief that her guidance had not been wasted. I think I finally understand. I whispered. This isn't just about a corset or the way I look. It's about being able to exist as me in the world. She nodded, a faint smile curling her lips.
Exactly.
And now, no one can take that away from you. I stepped back from the mirror, standing tall, breathing evenly. The reflection wasn't someone else anymore. It was me. Fully, entirely, irrevocably. And for the first time, I felt the exhilarating weight of freedom. The corset, the lessons, the months of struggle, they had all led to this. Not a moment of triumph in front of an audience, not a compliment from someone else, but a quiet, unwavering certainty that I belonged in my own skin. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Deep, solid, unshakable peace. And I knew that tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that, I would face the world exactly as I was, not a shadow of someone else, not a student clinging to a teacher's voice, but a woman fully awake in her own body, her own mind, and her own life. Facing the world without fear. The weeks following my first solo outings were a mixture of triumph and tremor. Each day, I walked farther, spoke louder, moved more freely, and yet somewhere deep in my chest, a faint whisper of doubt always lingered. The world outside didn't know me. It didn't know my story. And for the first time, I had to decide whether my confidence was real, whether it could survive judgment, scrutiny, or even the casual dismissal of strangers. One crisp morning, I decided to take a bus into the city. I dressed carefully, a muted green blouse with soft, flowing sleeves, and a skirt that moved like water around my knees. My hair was brushed lightly, lips bare but cared for, posture perfect, chin lifted. I had done this before, but today felt heavier, significant. The bus was crowded. People pressed close, eyes occasionally flicking toward me. Some were polite, neutral, some glanced curiously. My first instinct was the old one: shrink, avoid, disappear. But I remembered Clara's words, whispered into my memory. The world won't always understand what it sees. But you don't need its permission to exist. So I breathed. Slowly. Evenly. I squared my shoulders and held my gaze forward. And I felt a thrill. When a man beside me muttered something under his breath, I didn't flinch. When a group of teens laughed as they passed, I didn't shrink. For the first time, I realized that my confidence wasn't fragile or dependent on isolation. It was anchored in months of discipline, in every lesson, every struggle, every tear and tremor that had shaped me. Off the bus, the city was alive, noisy, chaotic, indifferent. I walked among the throng, each step deliberate, each movement claiming my space. A small cafe drew my attention. I paused, noticing my reflection in the glass, the sunlight catching the curve of my jaw, the soft flare of my skirt. The woman in the window smiled faintly back at me, a mirror of composure, a declaration of self. Inside, the barista greeted me warmly. I returned the smile, feeling the natural rise and fall of my voice as I ordered tea. Every motion, every word, was mine. No instruction, no guidance.
Just me.
Yet, despite this outward calm, the fear returned later that afternoon. A stranger, a sharp, scrutinizing gaze, held my eyes for longer than necessary. My chest tightened, hands trembled, and I felt the old instinct to hide creeping back. But then, quietly, I reminded myself of all I had endured: the hours of corset tightening, the repeated corrections, the nights of reflection, the lessons that had taught me not to follow someone else's voice, but my own. I squared my shoulders and held his gaze back. And when he finally looked away, I laughed softly at my own shock. The thrill of realizing I could withstand judgment, that I had become more than fear. Returning home, I felt the pulse of pride and exhaustion mingling. Clara was waiting, her presence calm but expectant. "How was your day?" she asked quietly. I didn't hesitate. I was scared at first, I admitted. But I didn't shrink. I didn't hide. I held myself. She studied me, and I realized she wasn't just measuring my success. She was witnessing a transformation that went far beyond posture, voice, or even clothing. It had become a state of being. "You've reached a point few ever do," she said softly. "The world tests us in ways we cannot prepare for, but you didn't need preparation. You carried yourself fully." That night, standing before the mirror, I felt something shift inside me. The woman staring back was not merely molded by lessons, corsets, or guidance. She was my own creation, resilient, poised, aware, entirely alive. And yet, I understood now that transformation wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, courage, the willingness to face every glance, every judgment, every passing moment with grace, even when fear whispered otherwise. The city had tested me, strangers had challenged me, and still, I had survived, not as someone who followed someone else's rules, but as someone who had claimed herself. I touched the mirror softly, tracing my reflection, as if recognizing a friend I had been afraid to meet. "You're ready," I whispered to her. And for the first time, I believed it. Fully me, a journey completed. The morning light streamed through the windows, soft and golden, touching everything it fell upon. I stood at the edge of the living room, my reflection shimmering faintly in the glass door. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the tug of uncertainty or the echo of someone else's voice guiding me. I was fully, unapologetically myself. I dressed deliberately, but freely. My blouse, a delicate shade of lavender, flowed gently over my shoulders. My skirt hugged my waist just enough to show the curves I had grown into, but without the rigid confines of the corset. I brushed my hair lightly, letting it cascade naturally. Every movement was mine, every breath mine, every thought my own. Clara entered quietly, pausing to watch me from the doorway. Her expression was unreadable at first, but then a soft smile broke across her face. "You've come far," she said. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words but no longer their control. "I've come into myself," I replied. For a long moment, we simply watched each other, teacher and student, mentor and creation, observer and self-made person. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. The transformation was never about clothes, corsets, or lessons. It was about discovering the strength within, claiming it, and finally letting it guide every step. Later, I walked outside, the city welcoming me in all its chaos and beauty. People passed by, some curious, some indifferent, some smiling. And for the first time, none of it mattered. I walked with the confidence I had cultivated, with the grace I had practiced, and with the certainty that my presence, my identity, and my body belonged to me alone. I thought of the first day I had worn the corset, stiff and awkward under Clara's watchful eyes. I remembered the trembling, the uncertainty, the fear that I could never reconcile myself with this new identity. And I smiled, a quiet, serene smile. That fear had been necessary. It had been the spark that ignited growth. I stopped by a quiet park, sitting on a bench, and watched the world move around me. Children played, couples walked hand in hand, birds danced through the sunlight. Everything was ordinary, yet everything felt charged with meaning. I had once feared judgment, rejection, invisibility. Now I felt visible, complete, and wholly at peace. Clara joined me, walking slowly, letting me occupy my own space fully. She didn't correct me, didn't instruct me, didn't guide me. She simply walked beside me, a silent acknowledgement of the journey completed. "You've done it," she said softly. "No," I replied, turning to her. "We've done it. But mostly, I did it for myself." She nodded, a rare softness in her eyes. That's the part most people never reach. To claim yourself without hesitation, without fear, without needing someone else to tell you who you are. The sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I leaned back, feeling the gentle breeze on my face, savoring the quiet triumph of existence fully claimed. My body, my mind, my spirit, all aligned, all mine. For months, I had been molded, guided, tested, and shaped. And now, at last, I stood fully in the person I had become, confident, graceful, aware, and free. The corset that once confined me, the lessons that once dictated my every movement, the fears that once shackled me, all had led to this singular, undeniable truth. I am me. Entirely, irrevocably, unapologetically me. And in that moment, under the warm glow of the setting sun, I knew that nothing could ever take that away. The journey had begun in restraint, and it ended in liberation. And it was perfect.